I slept beside a stranger for years. He smiled at my children, tied their shoelaces, told bedtime stories, and fixed the fence on Saturdays. To the neighborhood, he was Ethan Gray, polite, helpful, the kind of man people trusted. To me, he was my husband. One rainy afternoon, while he was away, I found a small metal box taped at the bottom of our living room drawer. Inside were passports with other names, photos of warehouses, and a little hard drive wrapped in plastic. The kitchen light felt wrong. My hands shook as I steadied the papers on the table. At that moment, everything shifted. The life I had built, pancake mornings, scraped knees, the maple tree in our yard, felt like a stage set. I tried to breathe, to make sense, but a cold, deep knot settled in my chest. I thought of the children playing in the next room, and a quick, clear thought formed. I must keep them safe. If you want to hear how I gathered proof without tipping him off, how I planned our escape, and why the smallest choices mattered more than any big dramatic rescue, stay with me. Hit like and subscribe if you want more honest, true stories like this. I will tell you every step. This is Oakfield, and this is how the truth began to unravel. Stay until the end. There are moments that will change the way you think about trust. Share with someone who needs hope. Oakfield looked like a photograph someone hung in a home and pretended was always true. There was one main street with a bakery that opened at dawn, a playground where parents traded coffee and small talk, and a river bridge where people walked dogs at sunset. We bought our little house the spring Noah was born. The sellers left a worn rocking chair and a tin of marbles in a drawer. We kept them. We planted a maple tree in the yard and watched it take root the way we did. Slow, steady, hopeful. Ethan was the kind of man you introduced without warning to friends because you trusted the sound of his laugh. He had broad hands that knew how to fix a leaky pipe or coax a stubborn window shut. He called himself a contractor, and he worked hard, sometimes too hard, until his shoulders ached. He liked swear words that made the children giggle, and he always tried to braid Lila's hair in ways that looked like a joke. He came to parent-teacher nights and brought the kids small things from job sites. A polished stone, a leftover tin of nails he'd wrapped in paper. Those small gestures felt huge in our house. Our mornings were ordinary and full. I would wake before the sun, put the kettle on, and shake flour into a pan. Pancakes were a Sunday ritual, 3 at a time, slightly burnt on the edges because Ethan liked them that way. I remember the smell of butter and sugar, Noah's fist pounding the table with excitement when it was his turn to flip, Lila smearing jam across her cheek and then looking at me with wide, careful eyes. We had a wooden table with dents and initials carved into its edge from years of hands. It held our plates and our arguments and then our apologies. It felt like the center of everything. Afternoons were for the market. I sold scarves I dyed and stitched by hand. The stall wasn't much, just a folding table and a lamp. But people came every weekend and bought small things that made their days brighter. Ethan would sometimes appear with coffee and a crooked grin, carrying 2 mugs and pretending he'd been testing a new ladder for a client. He knew the neighbors. He knew their birthdays. In Oakfield, the rhythm of people knowing each other is what keeps most of the loneliness away. We had routines that sounded dull on paper but felt like anchors. The way Ethan rubbed the cross of his palm when he was thinking, the song Noah hummed when he fell asleep, the little ritual of tucking Lila's blanket under her chin while she insisted she could do it herself. On rainy days, we would draw forts out of blankets and read by flashlight until the kids yawned and the house smelled like wool and crayons. I can still see the faded pattern of Lila's favorite dress, and the small scuff on the banister from the day Noah learned to climb without holding my hand. Because life was full of these small stitches. It was easy to trust. Trust was not a single decision. It was the muscle memory of everyday life. When Ethan said he had to leave for a big job, a week at a site county over, I believed him because I wanted to. Belief kept the children fed and the mornings bright. It kept me from looking too hard at the edges where questions build. There were neighbors who left casseroles when we were sick, and an elderly friend who came by with a thermos of soup and a story about a storm she'd survived. The town felt like a net under our feet. People waved across driveways. Names were remembered. When you live somewhere like Oakfield, other people's faces are part of your map. They show where you belong. And because the map felt so sure, little oddities folded into background noise. A jacket on a chair that I did not recognize at first. A call at midnight that Ethan said was from a supplier. A receipt tucked into a pocket for a hotel in a town he never mentioned driving to with me. These things sat in my head like small stones in a pocket. I would touch them sometimes, but not often, because touching meant weighing, and weighing meant choosing. At night, after the kids slept and the quiet returned, Ethan and I would still sit on the back steps and watch the last light leave the sky. He would tell me a story about a job, or about a man who needed help renovating an old church. I would listen, and sometimes the mundane details were enough. His voice, the cadence of it, because human voices can soothe worry until it seems ridiculous to be anxious. We held each other in that light, and it felt like safety. That safety is what made everything so sharp when it changed. When betrayal arrives in a life built of small things, it does not fall like a cliff. It unfolds like a seam coming undone, thread by thread. The maple tree we planted became a marker in memory. The day it first leafed, the day we painted the nursery, the day the neighbor's cat slept beneath it. Those simple memories became the contrast I would need later, proof that what I had lost was not just material, it was small kindnesses and trust. The first strange things were so small I almost missed them. It began with a missed call at midnight, Ethan's phone on the bedside table lighting up like a tiny alarm in the dark. He answered softly and said it was a supplier. I woke, listened for the cadence of his voice, and then drifted back to sleep. The next morning he shrugged and said the call was nothing. I believed him because believing fit the shape of our life. Then there were the small gifts that did not fit. A nicer watch appeared on his wrist that he said a client had insisted on paying him with, cash in envelopes tucked into pockets, a receipt in a jacket lining for a hotel 3 hours away, one I did not recognize on our map of towns we'd ever visited. Each thing had a simple explanation if you wanted one: a generous client, extra wages, a work trip. I wanted those explanations because they kept my days placid, and because the children needed pancakes in the morning, not a storm. One afternoon, a tall man came up our path and asked for Ethan. He introduced himself like any tradesman would, firm handshake, easy smile, but his gaze lingered too long on the porch toys and the maple tree. He said they had worked together on a job up the coast. He was polite, but his eyes counted our house as if taking stock. When he left, he said he would call to arrange something, and walked away with a manner that felt less neighborly and more purposeful. Around that same time, while searching for an old sweater in the attic, I found a camera case hidden behind boxes of holiday decorations. Ethan's explanation was that it was his father's. The film inside told a different story. Between family photos, kids at a lake, a faded picnic, were pictures of men at a dock, pallets stacked with wrapped bundles, a warehouse at dawn. The images had a distance to them, like someone was careful not to be seen. I remember sitting on the attic floor with a box of dust on my lap and feeling something like vertigo. The household smells, the lavender of a sachet, the cardboard stiffness of old boxes, felt foreign. I ran my fingers over the photos again and again, trying to make them translate into something harmless. My brain did that work, rearranging meaning until the edges of the strange fit into a shape I could live with. But rationalizing takes effort, and the mind only holds so much compromise. I started to do simple practical things. I began to write down dates of odd calls, the hotel name I had found, the times Ethan left town. I made a folder on my phone labeled Notes, and began saving pictures when I could. The act of writing made the worry less like a whisper and more like a file with pages. Keeping notes felt ridiculous and necessary at the same time. It was ridiculous because I felt like a woman watching shadows. Necessary because shadows can become real men if ignored. I tried to maintain normalcy, market days, pancakes, story time, but the list grew. The more I recorded, the less comfortable I felt letting everything sit in my head. Facts are patient. Feelings are loud. I decided to favor facts. There were nights I told myself I was overreacting. I would laugh at a silly conversation on television and push the photos from the attic to the back of a mental drawer. But the little things clustered like rain, each drop unremarkable, together leading to a flood. That sense that something was wrong lived like a small stone in my shoe, always there, not yet a shout, but enough to change the way I walked. By the time sunlight came slanting through the kitchen window and Noah ran in, yelling about a puddle he'd found, I had a notebook with dates and a picture folder that had gone from empty to full. My hands had started the quiet work of keeping evidence. Nothing dramatic, no shouting, just the slow, stubborn accumulation of proof, so that when I had to speak, I would not be talking from fear alone. It was the first practical thing I had done that felt like control. It was a washing rain kind of day, the kind where the sky pressed low and the house smelled like wet coats and lemon cleaner. Ethan had left early for a job, and the children were at a neighbor's for an hour while I folded laundry. I had meant to find batteries in the junk drawer. Instead, my fingers hit something cold and metal tucked behind a stack of old envelopes. The box was small and taped shut, the kind you keep for receipts or screws. It was heavier than I expected. I remember thinking for a moment that it could be anything, a keepsake, a note, some old tool. I don't know why I opened it. Maybe it was a small private hunger for truth. Or maybe I wanted to stop feeling the soft, creeping worry that had sat in the back of my throat for months. When the lid lifted, the light from the window hit the edges of passports. There were several of them, different names, different photos. I remember the way my hand hovered over them like someone about to touch a wound. I pulled them out slowly, one by one, as if speed would make the pages less sharp. There were fake IDs too, laminated and creased, and a stack of photographs wrapped in rubber bands. I unfolded the first photo and saw a warehouse at dawn, rows of crates wrapped in white plastic, men moving like shadows at the edges. There was a tiny Polaroid of a dock with a small boat, and a man I recognized only because of his posture, Ethan's shoulder, turned in a way I'd seen at the doorway. My world made a soft, terrible noise like glass settling. I set the papers on the table and the room tilted. The air felt colder, as if someone had opened a window. My fingers went numb at the tips. For a second, I could not breathe properly. There was a pressure behind my ribs as if the house itself had pulled away from me. I sat down hard on a chair and tried to name the feeling. Betrayal was one name. Another was disbelief. The third was shame. Shame that I had not seen it sooner. Shame that our ordinary life had covered something so dangerous. I did a thing that felt both small and enormous. I took photos. My hands shook as I pointed my phone at the passports and the pictures and the hard drive wrapped in a plastic bag. The camera shutter felt loud in the quiet kitchen. I uploaded the images to a folder labeled Notes on a laptop I only used when Ethan wasn't home. It felt like saving a life. One small, necessary act that could be proof if my memory ever failed. The hard drive was heavier than it looked. Its plastic casing had been taped over with a strip of clear tape. I wrapped it in a dish towel and tucked it away in the bottom of my closet, under winter scarves, where no one would think to look. The box I had found I slid back under a pile of magazines and then dragged into a darker corner. Hiding felt like bargaining. If I could put things out of sight, maybe I could buy myself time to think. For a while, I simply sat at the table and let the house exist around me. The light on the maple tree moved, and a single leaf tapped against the window like a small, impatient clock. I felt dizzy, as if I had been spun. Then anger came, not loud but hard and focused, at the idea that anyone could live two lives under the same roof. I thought of Ethan folding Noah's pajamas the week before, humming a silly song, and I could not reconcile the man I loved with the man in those photographs. Something in me shifted at that point. The small, jittery worry that I had tried to dismiss hardened into a plan. Panic would have been visible. Planning is quieter. I made a list in my head of things I needed to do. Copy the documents, hide backups, find a safe place for the hard drive. Tell one trusted person if things escalated. The list steadied me more than anything else I could have done in that moment. Before I left the kitchen, I put the passports back where I had found them and closed the box, but not before snapping one more photograph that showed the faded name on one passport. I sent that single image, buried in an email draft, to a place I could reach from a friend's laptop. It felt ridiculous and sensible at the same time, like carrying an umbrella on a day that might become stormy. As I carried a stack of towels to the closet, my hands were different. They moved through the motions of the day with a new edge. Every ordinary object felt a little sharper. The toast crumbs on the counter, the children's shoes by the door, the small dent on the table where Noah had fallen the summer before. The house had always been a collection of small things that made a life, and now each small thing felt like a clue in a case I had not meant to open. When Ethan came home that night, the house smelled of coffee and rain. The children were asleep, the lights dim, and the kitchen clock ticked too loudly. I had laid everything out on the table. The passports, the photos, the small notebook I'd found in the box. My hands were cold, and I remember thinking how strange it was that such small objects could weigh so much. He walked in, shaking the damp from his jacket, smiling in that easy way that used to calm me. "Hey," he said, his voice soft, familiar. "You're up late." "I found something," I said. He saw the papers before I finished the sentence. His smile faltered, only for a second, but it was enough. The warmth left the room in that heartbeat. He didn't move closer. He just stared at the table like it was an animal that might bite him. "What's all this?" he asked, tone controlled, a little too casual. "You tell me," I said quietly, "because I don't recognize the man in these photos." For a moment, silence filled the space between us, thick and careful. Then he laughed, a short practice sound that didn't reach his eyes. "You're overthinking again, Claire," he said. "They're from a contract job. I told you I work with people who use cover names sometimes. Safety reasons. Nothing to worry about." "Passports?" I asked. "With your face and 4 different names? Photos of crates? What kind of contracting is that?" He sighed and stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You know how dangerous some areas can be? Sometimes I have to take work under another name. It's for protection, mine and yours." It almost sounded believable. His tone was patient, his body language careful, palms open, shoulders lowered. I wanted to believe him, the way you want to believe a doctor who says the pain is temporary. I wanted to close the box, tuck the questions away, and go back to our quiet mornings and pancakes. But the words didn't fit anymore. They rattled like loose screws in the walls of our life. "Then why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Why hide it? Why the box? Why the fake IDs?" He rubbed his face with both hands, groaning like a man tired of being misunderstood. "Because you'd panic. You always worry, Claire. I didn't want to scare you with business details. You think everything has meaning, but it's just work." "Work doesn't come with guns and warehouses, Ethan," I said, the edge in my voice surprising both of us. He froze. A flicker of irritation passed across his face, there and gone. Then he reached out, placing his hand over mine. His skin was warm, familiar. "Hey, look at me," he said gently. "Everything I've done, it's for this family. The money, the long hours, the trips. It's to keep you and the kids safe. You think I'd ever hurt you? The words hit something soft in me. For a second, my mind ran through every good thing. The nights he held a feverish child, the way he kissed the top of my head when I burned dinner, the sound of his laugh when Lila danced in circles. My throat ached. How could both versions of him exist in one body? But then I saw the passport again. The photograph that didn't belong to any story he'd told me. The ledger with amounts that had nothing to do with carpentry. The shadow behind every excuse. You don't have to hurt me to lie to me, I said, barely above a whisper. He pulled back, exhaling. You're twisting everything, he muttered. People I work for wouldn't like you going through my things. You shouldn't have touched that box, Claire. His tone had changed. Less warmth, more warning. My chest tightened. I shouldn't have had to, I said, forcing calm into my voice. If this was all innocent, you'd have told me. He looked at me for a long time, the mask slipping just slightly. Something hard flickered in his eyes, then vanished. You're scared, he said finally, softer again. You've always been the emotional one. Please, let's not do this in front of the kids. Tomorrow I'll explain everything, okay? It was a performance. Good enough that a part of me almost applauded. He gathered the papers with trembling hands, stacked them neatly as though tidying the truth could erase it. I let him, because fighting would have made everything too visible. The children slept down the hall. I couldn't let their world crack open tonight. He poured himself coffee and stood at the window, back turned to me. The silence was thick again, filled with the sound of rain on glass. You know I love you, he said finally, voice low. Don't make this into something it's not. That line stayed in my head long after he went to bed. I sat alone at the table, staring at the empty cup he'd left, and tried to decide which version of my husband had just spoken to me. The one who loved his family, or the one who had lied to keep us blind. Maybe both were real. Maybe that was the cruelty of it. That kindness and deceit can share the same heartbeat. I waited until I heard him snore before I gathered the copies I'd made and slipped them into my purse. I moved quietly, afraid that even the creak of the floorboards might betray me. In that stillness, I made myself a silent promise. The next time I confronted him, it would not be with words. It would be with proof. I stopped waiting for answers after that night. Something inside me turned, quietly but completely. It wasn't rage anymore. It was resolve. I woke up before dawn the next morning, long before Ethan stirred, and made a cup of coffee I didn't drink. I sat at the kitchen table and began to plan. I wasn't a detective. I was just a mother who folded laundry, packed lunches, and kissed scraped knees. But survival makes you learn fast. You learn to look twice, to remember details, to stay calm even when your pulse beats too hard against your throat. The first thing I did was gather everything I could. Every photo I'd taken of the box, the passports, and the papers. I uploaded them to a private cloud account under a fake name. I used a new email, one I made at the library so it wouldn't show up in our home computer's history. The librarian probably thought I was writing to an old friend. She smiled at me kindly when I asked about Wi-Fi. Next came the physical copies. I printed a few photos and tucked them into an envelope marked school forms. I slipped it into the back of Noah's old art folder, knowing Ethan never looked at anything covered in crayon. I took the small hard drive from the closet, wrapped it in foil, old spy advice I'd once read, and hid it in the lining of a coat at the back of my wardrobe. Every act felt ridiculous and vital at the same time, like threading a lifeline through the ordinary. When Ethan left for work, I opened the drawers in his desk for the first time. My hands shook, but I'd learned to breathe slowly, to think like someone cleaning, not searching. At first, I found nothing but invoices, blueprints, and old receipts. Then I saw a leather-bound ledger tucked beneath a stack of manuals. It looked ordinary until I opened it. Inside were lines of numbers and words that made no sense. Half-coded phrases like, Oak 12 units, and Silo midnight. Some lines were marked with initials I didn't recognize. I turned each page carefully, photographing everything. I didn't understand the system, but I recognized patterns. Certain places repeated every few pages, the same dates appearing months apart. A few entries were circled with small ticks beside them, Ethan's handwriting. There was even a faint coffee ring across a note that read, "Shipment cleared, 6:14. That one made my stomach twist. Shipment of what? I closed the book slowly and sat back, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. I didn't need to solve the code. I only needed to prove that one existed. Proof could keep us safe later if things went bad, if someone ever asked why I ran. That evening, while Ethan dozed on the couch and the kids watched cartoons, I quietly swapped my phone's SIM card for a prepaid one I'd bought at a gas station. It wasn't much, but it meant I could make calls he wouldn't see. I wrote down emergency contacts in code on a recipe card and taped it behind the flour tin in the pantry. Little things, tiny safeguards, all hidden in plain sight. Every action made me both calmer and more afraid. Calm, because planning gave me something to control. Afraid, because each precaution proved how far from normal we had drifted. There was one more step I took that week. One Ethan would never imagine. I went to the Oakfield Savings Bank during my lunch break and opened a small safety deposit box under my maiden name. The clerk didn't ask many questions. She only needed my ID and a signature. Inside, I placed a USB drive containing every photograph and a note written in my own hand. If I disappear, this is why. It felt melodramatic as I wrote it, but fear makes you prepare for melodrama. Back home, I smiled as I cooked dinner, answered the kids' questions, laughed at Ethan's jokes. The performance became muscle memory. Every time he left the room, I checked that my phone was locked and that my purse was where I'd hidden the spare keys. Even my body began to move differently. Lighter when he wasn't home, careful when he was. Late that night, after everyone was asleep, I took one last photo, the ledger open on page 14, Ethan's handwriting clear under the lamplight. I zoomed in and noticed something new. A faint sketch in the margin, the outline of a small bird. It was his doodle, the one he always drew when thinking. It made the whole thing more human, and somehow that hurt the most. Monsters don't doodle birds, men do. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the phone, wondering when exactly the man I loved had become a stranger living in the same house. The silence felt like a warning. I looked toward the children's room and whispered a promise I'd said every night since this began. I'll keep you safe. Whatever it takes. It began with a car I didn't recognize. A dark sedan parked across from the school where I dropped off Noah and Lila. 2 men inside, pretending not to watch. One smoked. The other scrolled through his phone, but his eyes kept flicking up every few seconds, just long enough for me to notice. At first, I told myself it was coincidence. Maybe parents, maybe workers waiting for someone. But when I returned that afternoon, the car was still there, idling. A different parking spot, same men. My hands went cold on the steering wheel. The world outside the windshield felt smaller, sharper. That night I found a note slipped under our front door. Plain white paper, typed words, mind your place, no signature. No explanation. I read it 3 times before I sat down. The words looked ordinary, but my pulse wasn't. It beat so hard I could hear it in my ears. Ethan was out working late. The kids were upstairs watching cartoons. I locked every door and window, then sat in the dark living room, listening for footsteps that didn't belong. The house creaked the way old houses do. But that night, every sound felt deliberate. Every whisper of wind at the window sounded like someone testing the frame. I waited until midnight, holding a kitchen knife I never used before, and watched the porch light throw shadows across the floor. The next morning, the locks on the back door looked scratched, as if someone had tried to force them. My heart dropped into my stomach. I checked the garage. The latch had been moved. Nothing stolen. Just touched. Enough to tell me, "We can reach you." I wanted to call the police, but what would I say? My husband might be someone dangerous, and now strangers are watching my house. Without proof, I would sound paranoid. And if Ethan was involved, calling anyone might only make things worse. So I stayed quiet. And smarter. I changed our routine, dropped the kids at a different entrance, walked home by a longer route, kept the curtains drawn even in daylight. Fear taught me to notice everything. A van parked one street too many times, the same jogger passing twice, the faint smell of cigarette smoke near the porch when no one smoked in this house. One night, around 2 a.m., I woke to footsteps outside, slow, deliberate, gravel crunching under weight. I froze listening. Then came a soft metallic sound. The gate latch. I reached for my phone and dialed Ethan, even though I knew he wouldn't answer. The call went straight to voicemail. I stayed on the line, whispering into the quiet. "Please don't come closer. Please." The steps faded after a minute, but I didn't sleep again that night. I sat in the hallway outside the kids' room, the knife on my lap, listening to their soft breathing. I kept thinking, this is what it means to be a mother. Fear doesn't paralyze you. It rearranges your priorities. You learn to keep breathing so they can. The next day, when I walked them to school, I noticed a white van parked a few cars away. The same one that had been near the bank last week. It pulled out as I left and followed for 3 turns before disappearing. My palms were slick with sweat on the steering wheel. I forced myself to drive casually, to not let fear show, even as my mind listed everything that could go wrong if they knew I knew. When I got home, another note waited in the mailbox. Stop digging. No envelope this time. Just folded paper, damp from the morning dew. I burned it over the sink. The smell of scorched ink stayed in the air long after the paper was gone. That evening, I confronted Ethan again. Not about the box, but the fear. "Someone's been watching us," I said. "Do you know why?" He looked at me, too long, too still, then said, "You're imagining things. You've been stressed. I'll talk to the neighbors, okay?" It sounded caring. It wasn't. His tone wasn't protective. It was managerial, as if he were assessing damage control. When he hugged me that night, my muscles didn't move. I was no longer hugging a man. I was hugging a question. By then, I had moved most of my evidence into the safety deposit box. I kept copies of the photos on a hidden flash drive in my car, taped behind the glove compartment. Every morning I checked it before driving. That drive became my one small ritual of control, proof that I still had something they couldn't touch. But the warnings didn't stop. They grew quieter, subtler, more invasive. A missing key, a call from a blocked number that hung up after one ring. The dog next door barking at empty space near our fence. Fear stopped being a wave. It became the air itself. I breathed it, carried it, disguised it. And underneath all of it was a single thought that kept repeating in my head. They want me scared. But they don't know how careful I've become. That night, as I tucked Lila in, she asked, "Mom, why do we keep all the lights on now?" I smiled and said, "Because light keeps the monsters away." And I meant it. By the time I walked into the Oakfield police station, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I'd rehearsed what to say all morning. How to sound calm enough to be believed, scared enough to be taken seriously. The lobby smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper. A fluorescent light flickered above the reception desk. The officer who came to meet me wasn't what I expected. She was young, mid-30s maybe, with kind eyes and a tired smile. Her name tag read, Officer Dana Cole. She motioned for me to sit, offered me coffee, and waited until I started speaking. "I think my husband is involved in something illegal," I said, my voice steady at first, then faltering. "There are fake IDs, money I can't explain, and now people have been watching the house. I've gotten threats." Her expression softened, but she didn't interrupt. When I finished, she nodded slowly. "Do you have proof?" I slid my phone across the desk. Photos of the passports, the ledger pages, the typed notes. She looked at them carefully, scrolling in silence. Then she leaned back, exhaled, and said, "You did the right thing coming here." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of relief. Someone else finally knew, someone who might help, but her next words were quieter. "What you're describing, if it involves organized trafficking or smuggling, we can't act on suspicion alone. We'll need to open a formal report, cross-check identities, and, if necessary, coordinate with federal authorities. That takes time. Time. The one thing I didn't have." "Ma'am," she said gently, "are you and your children in immediate danger right now?" I hesitated. I don't know. Maybe. Someone's following us. They left notes. The locks have been tampered with." "Okay," she said, her tone changing from bureaucratic to personal. "Here's what we can do immediately." She pulled a pad closer and began writing. "First, I'll file a preliminary report under domestic threat with possible organized crime connection. Second, we can send a patrol car near your street at night for the next week. Third, I need you to document every incident, dates, times, photos, and if anyone tries to contact you, don't engage. Call us." It was all logical, procedural, and painfully slow. "Can you arrest him?" I asked quietly. "Not yet," she said, meeting my eyes. "Not until we have something concrete linking him directly to a crime. For now, what you have is strong circumstantial evidence. It'll help, but we have to build the rest carefully." Her words were reasonable, but I could feel the weight pressing on my chest again. Carefully. The world she lived in moved carefully, measured steps, signed forms, waiting for confirmation. The world I lived in had shadows outside my children's school. She must have seen the panic flicker across my face because she leaned forward, voice low. "Listen to me. I've seen cases like this. You're smart. You've already taken the right precautions. Keep doing that. Don't let him see that you're scared or that you've come here. Do you have somewhere safe to go if things get worse?" "Maybe," I lied. I didn't, but I didn't want to sound helpless. "Okay," she said. "Write down this number." She scribbled a line on the back of a business card. "It's a direct line to my desk. If anything happens, anything as you call, don't wait for protocol." I nodded and she added quietly, "You're not crazy. You're careful. There's a difference." When I stepped out of the station, the sunlight was harsh. The world looked the same. Cars passing, a woman walking her dog, a boy selling cookies by the post office. But I felt something fragile inside me starting to split between hope and dread. I had taken a step forward, but the ground still felt unstable. At a cafe across the street, I sat down, ordered tea, and reread her card. Officer Dana Cole, Oakfield PD. I traced the number with my finger and saved it under a fake name on my phone. I should have felt safe. But as I looked through the window, I saw a man standing across the street, half hidden behind a newsstand. He wasn't looking directly at me, just enough that I could tell he was aware of me. Or maybe paranoia was rewriting what my eyes saw. I couldn't tell anymore. I paid quickly and left, walking briskly back to the car. My fingers hovered over my phone. I thought about calling Dana right then, but what would I say? He's looking at me funny? He might be following me? I could almost hear her voice reminding me about evidence, about confirmation. That's when I realized the truth. Institutions move on facts. Mothers move on instinct. At home, I wrote everything down. The time I saw him, the clothes he wore, the angle of his body near the newsstand. I even drew a map of the area. Every detail mattered now. I stored it all in my folder labeled Notes 2. That night, After the kids went to bed, I looked at the card again. "You're not crazy," she'd said. I repeated it aloud until the words sounded almost believable. Then I slipped the card behind the family photo on the mantel. The one of Ethan holding Lila at the fair, both smiling. It felt like tucking a small truth behind a larger lie. For the first time, I understood something painful. The system could record my fear, but it couldn't live it for me. The waiting would be mine alone. Still, for one fragile moment before I turned off the light, I let myself imagine a world where her promise was enough, where the patrol car on our street could keep the darkness at bay. It wasn't peace, but it was almost hope. And for that night, almost was enough. The morning after visiting the police station, I woke with a plan already forming. Crisp, sharp, terrifying in its simplicity. There was no more space for hesitation. I had tried logic, reason, and waiting. Now I would prepare. Quietly, carefully, as if every move were part of a game where the wrong breath could cost everything. I began with lists. Not emotional ones, practical. Passports, birth certificates, emergency cash, the hard drive, the number for Officer Cole. Each item written in small, neat handwriting on a sheet of paper that I folded and hid inside a cookbook Ethan never touched. The money was harder. I had no secret account, no savings in my name alone, so I started peeling small bills from grocery cashbacks, tucking them in the hem of an old winter jacket. 10 here, 20 there, a few coins from Ethan's jeans when I did the laundry. It felt petty, but survival often begins in small, humiliating acts of caution. By the end of 2 weeks, I had nearly $400, enough to get the kids away, not far, but away. I packed a bag I called the quiet one. Inside, 2 sets of clothes each, water bottles, a flashlight, Lila's stuffed rabbit, a printed photo of us at the maple tree. I tucked a small note into the lining. If found, we're safe. It felt superstitious, but part of me needed the ritual. Proof that even fear could have order. The bag went into the trunk, beneath a blanket and a box labeled yard tools. Ethan never checked the trunk. I started teaching Noah, in whispers during bedtime stories, what to do if something went wrong. If Mommy says the word storm, I told him, you grab Lila's hand and run to the neighbor's porch. You don't wait for me. Knock loud. Don't stop. He nodded like a little soldier, serious, understanding more than a child should. I taught Lila how to unlock my phone and press the green button for the police. We practiced when Ethan wasn't home. Only if it's scary, I told her. Only then. Each small lesson felt like both armor and heartbreak. Mothers aren't supposed to teach escape drills. That weekend, I called my sister, Maya. We hadn't spoken much lately. Distance, different lives. But I trusted her. The call was short, coded. Thinking of bringing the kids for a few days, I said. Could use a break. Things have been tense. She heard it. The pause on the other end told me she did. Come anytime, she said softly. I'll keep the guest room ready. You just tell me when. 2 days later, I drove to see her under the pretense of delivering a scarf order to a nearby market. I left the kids with a neighbor and told Ethan I'd be gone a few hours. When Maya opened her door, I didn't speak at first. I just handed her the flash drive and whispered, if something happens to me, this explains it. She didn't ask questions. She just wrapped her arms around me. You're scaring me, she said into my hair. I'm scared too, I said. But I can't leave yet. I have to do it right, for them. We sat at her kitchen table, whispering over tea. I laid out my plan in pieces. The packed bag, the coded words, the emergency numbers. I told her about the car outside the school, the notes, the ledger. She listened, face pale but determined. When it's time, she said finally, you come straight here. I'll handle the rest. We decided the cover story would be simple. a family trip to visit my sister for the weekend. I'd tell Ethan I needed a change of scenery, that the kids missed their aunt. No confrontation, no warning. Just a smile, a bag in the trunk, and a quiet drive toward freedom. The next few days, I rehearsed it like a script. Every sentence had to sound natural. Every gesture had to match the life I'd built for him to believe in. I practiced how to smile without showing fear, how to say I love you without my voice cracking. Pretending normal became an act of war. At night, I'd check the bag, add one more thing, a spare toothbrush, painkillers, the children's favorite snacks. I taped Officer Cole's number inside the lining, where only I could find it. I whispered prayers into folded clothes. The fear was constant, but it sharpened me. I moved through days with quiet precision. Calm voice, steady hands, eyes always scanning. Ethan noticed none of it. He still kissed my cheek when he left for work, still told the kids stories at dinner. It was as if my world had split in two. The one he lived in, and the one I was quietly building under his nose. 3 nights before I planned to leave, I stood at the window watching headlights pass down the street. I wondered which light would be ours soon, the one leading away, or the one coming to stop us. I didn't know. I only knew I couldn't wait for permission anymore. Maya texted one word that night. Ready. I wrote back. Soon. Then I hid my phone under my pillow, lay awake listening to the rhythm of Ethan's breathing beside me, and counted every second until morning. Each breath felt like a small act of rebellion. Each plan, a promise to my children that their story would not end in fear. The morning we left, the sky was a thin gray, soft, harmless, ordinary. I made pancakes like always, pretending it was just another Sunday. Ethan was cheerful, humming while he fixed the screen door. He kissed my forehead and told me to text when we reached Maya's. I smiled back, steadying my hand so he wouldn't see the tremor. Every move that morning was deliberate theater. I packed the kids' things into small duffels, enough to look casual, not suspicious. Lila carried her stuffed rabbit. Noah brought his sketchbook. I slipped the quiet bag into the trunk under the blanket. My heart pounded so loud I was sure Ethan could hear it over the sound of the kettle. "Drive safe," he said, tapping the roof of the car. His eyes lingered longer than usual. "I will," I replied, forcing a calm smile. As soon as the house disappeared in the rearview mirror, I felt the smallest taste of air that didn't burn my lungs. But freedom has a sound, a heartbeat that's too fast, a silence that's too loud. Every car behind me looked like a threat. Every passing van made my fingers tighten on the steering wheel. The children laughed in the back seat, singing a silly song from a cartoon, unaware that their world was shifting beneath them. I kept checking the mirrors, waiting for the white van to appear. It didn't take long. At the edge of Oakfield, I saw it. Same make, same faint dent near the headlight. It turned onto the highway half a minute after I did. My pulse slammed. I told myself not to panic. Panic makes you visible. I slowed slightly, then took the next exit without signaling, pretending I'd missed a turn. The van followed for 2 miles before taking another road. I didn't breathe until it disappeared behind a hill. The highway opened before us. Wide, quiet, endless. The radio played a song about summer and homecoming. My hands were slick with sweat on the wheel. I kept replaying Ethan's face in my mind. The calm smile. The way he'd said, "Drive safe." Did he know? Was he already calling someone? The fear shifted shapes. It wasn't the loud terror of footsteps outside the house. It was quieter, sharper, a voice in my head whispering, "You're not safe yet." Maya's house was 3 hours away. For the first hour, I drove like someone being hunted. For the second, like someone daring to hope. Halfway there, I pulled into a rest stop to breathe. The kids begged for ice cream from the small stand near the pumps. I bought them cones with shaky hands, watching every car that pulled in, every stranger's face reflected in the window. My heartbeat slowed, but only slightly. "Are we almost there?" Noah asked, his mouth covered in chocolate. "Almost," I said. "And when we get there, you'll see Aunt Maya. She made cookies." He grinned, satisfied, and went back to drawing in his sketchbook. I envied that simplicity, a child's faith that destinations are always safe. We got back on the road. The sun was lower now, slicing through the trees in gold streaks. The kids dozed off. I drove with one hand on the wheel and one on the small note taped inside the dashboard. Keep driving. Every mile felt like a chapter closing. The sound of the tires on asphalt was my heartbeat. My throat ached from holding in tears, from holding everything. I didn't dare cry yet. Crying would feel like stopping, and stopping meant danger could catch up. When I finally turned into Maya's driveway, my hands went numb. She was waiting outside, standing in the porch light like an anchor. The moment I saw her, something inside me cracked. I parked, turned off the engine, and for a second, the silence was unbearable. Then I exhaled, long, deep, shaking. My body remembered what safety might feel like, and it hurt. Maya ran to the car and opened the back door. "You made it," she whispered. I nodded, unable to speak. The kids tumbled out, sleepy and confused, asking why I was crying. I crouched down, held them both, and said the only thing I could. "We're okay now." But even as I said it, I looked over Maya's shoulder at the empty road behind her house, half expecting headlights to appear. The relief was real but fragile, like a soap bubble you don't dare touch. Inside, Maya made tea. The house smelled like cinnamon and safety. I sat at the table, hands trembling, watching steam rise from the cup. My reflection in the window looked different, older, thinner, harder. When the children finally fell asleep in the guest room, I went outside for air. The night was quiet, the kind of quiet that used to mean peace. I leaned against the car and felt the hum of the engine cooling beneath my palm. For the first time in months, there were no footsteps outside the door. No notes, no lies, only the ache of what I'd left behind, and the question of what would come next. Freedom didn't feel triumphant. It felt raw. It felt like standing in cold wind after being underwater too long, but it was still freedom. And when Maya came out, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders, I let myself cry. Not from fear this time, but from the exhaustion of surviving. 2 weeks after I reached Maya's house, the police came for the evidence. It was early morning, that color of light that makes everything look too honest. I handed Officer Cole a plain cardboard box. Inside were the hard drive, the ledger, the photos, and the memory stick I'd hidden behind the glove compartment. My fingerprints were still on the tape. "This is everything," I told her. She nodded, flipping through the contents with gloved hands. "You've done incredible work, Claire. Most people freeze or run. You built a record." I wanted to feel proud, but pride had been replaced by exhaustion. "Does this mean it's over?" I asked. Her expression softened. "It means it's beginning, officially." The next few days blurred into procedures. Statements, transcripts, signatures. I sat under fluorescent lights answering questions from detectives, investigators, people from agencies I'd never heard of. They spoke in careful tones, their words laced with codes. Distribution network, controlled shipments, financial laundering. Each phrase built a clearer picture of what Ethan's secret life had really been. When they told me the truth, that he wasn't just a courier or a middleman, but a regional organizer for a drug trafficking ring, I felt the air leave my lungs. It wasn't shock anymore. It was confirmation. The facts had finally caught up to the dread. "Will he go to prison?" I asked. Officer Cole paused. "If he's found," she said quietly. They had raided 2 warehouses and an old dockyard Ethan had used. Several men were arrested. 2 others disappeared before the raids. Ethan was one of them. That word, disappeared, had weight. It carried both safety and danger. Safety, because he wasn't here. Danger, because no one knew where he was. The media descended quickly after the arrests. Oakfield was suddenly in headlines. Small-town operation tied to cross-border trafficking ring. Reporters called the house, camped near the school, and chased details like scavengers. My face was never shown, but words like wife, family, and children appeared in stories that still felt too close. I turned down interviews, declined every request. Officer Cole arranged a protective order and a temporary address seal. Still, I found cameras parked near Maya's street for days. Every click of a shutter felt like a violation. Another stranger taking pieces of a life I'd worked so hard to protect. The investigation stretched on for months. I met with prosecutors who used words like cooperation and testimony. I told them everything I knew about the passports, the coded ledger, the nights I'd heard him on the phone whispering names that didn't belong to our world. I gave them every detail, every date from my notes. There was relief in sharing the burden, but also fear in making it public. Every fact I gave them felt like opening a wound, and underneath it all was one quiet, unrelenting thought. What if someone wants to silence me too? Some nights, when the children were asleep, I'd check the locks 3 times, 4. I kept the kitchen knife beside the bed longer than I'd like to admit. I watched every car that passed, memorized license plates, listened for the sound of engines idling too long. Safety wasn't a switch. It was a slow rebuild of trust in the world outside. Officer Cole called every few days. "We've secured most of the evidence chain," she'd say. "You and the kids are safe." I believed her voice more than the words. She told me that Ethan's accounts were frozen, that assets were being traced, that the ring had splintered. But she also told me not to travel far alone, not yet. "Just until the dust settles," she said. When the indictment came, it felt like an ending written in paperwork. Cole brought copies of the court documents, thick with legal phrasing. My name appeared in small print. Confidential Witness A. I traced the letters with my finger. The anonymity felt both comforting and cruel. "Will this protect us?" I asked. "It's the best we can do," she said. "And it's a good start." The word start lingered again. I realized justice doesn't arrive all at once. It trickles, slow and administrative. Healing is the same way. I enrolled the kids in a new school under a different address. We changed our phone numbers, our routines, even the route we took to the store. The maple tree back home, the one we planted years ago, probably stood unchanged, but we couldn't go back to see it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Sometimes at night, I still imagine Ethan somewhere far away, maybe hiding, maybe regretting, maybe plotting. I don't know. The not knowing is its own kind of prison. But I remind myself, mine has walls I chose. His doesn't. The investigation continued through the year. Arrests led to trials. Trials led to names. Names led to ghosts of people I'd never met, but whose lives intersected mine through deceit. Each headline brought a new wave of unease, but also closure. The last time I saw Officer Cole, she handed me a folder and said, "This is the official statement copy. You can keep it for your records, or burn it if you'd rather forget." I took it home and placed it in a drawer. Not the one where the box used to be. That drawer was long gone. But a new one, in a house where light came through the windows without feeling like an interrogation. I didn't burn it. I kept it, not as proof of him, but as proof of me. Proof that fear can be documented, and survival can have a paper trail too. Healing didn't arrive like sunrise. It came quietly, in uneven pieces. A night of full sleep here. A day without checking the locks there. Some mornings I woke and felt almost ordinary again, until a noise or a smell sent my pulse racing. But even then, the fear didn't own me anymore. It was just something passing through. Therapy helped. At first I sat in silence, unsure how to start. My therapist, a woman named Grace with calm eyes and a voice like still water, told me that recovery isn't about forgetting. It's about learning to live alongside the memories without letting them steer. She asked me to name one thing each day that felt safe. For weeks, my answer was always the same: the children breathing in the next room. Over time, the list grew. The feel of warm dough between my hands when I baked, the sound of rain without panic, the way my sister's laughter filled the kitchen again. Small things, but they stitched the world back together. I started selling scarves again at the market. The first day back, I stood behind my little table and waited for someone to stop. When a customer ran her fingers across the fabric and smiled, it felt like an affirmation that life could exist beyond fear. People remembered me, asked where I'd been. I just said, away for a while. They nodded, and that was enough. The community quietly gathered around us in ways I hadn't expected. Neighbors dropping off cookies, friends slipping notes of encouragement into my bags. One evening, the local women's group sent a card that read, "You're stronger than what tried to break you." I cried reading it, not because it was poetic, but because it was true. The kids started laughing louder again. Noah built a treehouse in Maya's yard with old planks from her shed. Lila painted the boards with stars. Watching them from the porch, I realized they were already learning what it took me years to grasp. That safety isn't the absence of danger. It's the presence of love that outlasts it. In the spring, we planted a small bush in the backyard, a hydrangea, blue like the sky after rain. Maya handed me the trowel, and I pressed my fingers into the cool earth. The soil smelled alive, forgiving. "For new beginnings," she said. We didn't make a ceremony out of it. We didn't have to. The act itself was enough. I think about the maple tree back home sometimes, the one Ethan and I planted when Noah was born. It must still be standing, roots deep in the same soil, branches heavy with years, but I no longer ache for it. This new plant, this small blue blossom, is mine. Ours. It doesn't carry his shadow. At night, when the children sleep, I sometimes sit by the window with a cup of tea and look at the horizon. The dark no longer feels like something waiting to swallow me. It's just the world resting, same as we are. Officer Cole still checks in occasionally, usually just a text. "How are you holding up?" I always reply, "Better." And it's the truth. Not perfect, not whole, but better. I've learned that survival doesn't end with escape. It continues in the small, stubborn acts of rebuilding. Making breakfast, folding laundry, showing up for the ordinary moments you once feared you'd never see again. One afternoon, as I watched the hydrangea bloom, Lila asked, "Mom, are we safe now?" I looked at her, at the sunlight on her hair, the peace in her face, and said, "Yes, we're safe now." And for the first time, the words didn't feel borrowed from hope. They felt real. You've stayed with me through every chapter of this story. Through fear, through truth, through the slow return of peace. If it moved you, or reminded you of someone finding their own strength, I'd love for you to stay connected. Please like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need hope today. Stories like this aren't just about survival. They're about the quiet courage that so many people live every single day. And if you have a moment, tell me in the comments. If you had one piece of advice for a mother in my situation, what would it be? I read every word, and your voices make this space stronger. A place where survival turns into support, and fear turns into faith. Thank you for being here. This isn't the end. It's just the beginning of something safer, kinder, and real.